Welcome back to the Profit School by MeasureU podcast. This is the AI first edition, a conversation between myself, Jeff Sauer, and my co-host and business partner, Mercer. Today, we're going to be talking about building a culture of gusto. And so, as we traditionally do here, we start by helping you introducing the topic, Mercer. What do you think about when you think of this gusto thing? And then also, let's get into some definitions too.
Yeah, building a culture of gusto. That feels to me like when you've got your team, you're like, hey, they've got some gusto to them. It's like everyone's doing the right thing at the right time. People are focused. People are self-driven, right? Helping you grow the company without you feeling like you're constantly having to push everybody. I think that's kind of what I think about when I think about that feeling of gusto. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's funny because if I were to say gusto and I didn't know anything about what we're going to do in this episode, I'd be like, that's a weird thing to say. That's a weird way to describe gusto. Wouldn't it be more around like some kind of value or something? But I think as you'll see soon enough that actually makes sense for us. But definitely it seems like building a culture for your company, something that is enjoyable, people like. It's Spanish for like, gusto. So I can see that part. But also, I'm guessing there's some deeper meaning behind it, and I know there's some deeper meaning behind it. So we'll get into that. But just talking about culture in general, it's really, they always say that a culture. There's a few things that I've always heard is like a culture is short for cult. So ultimately, it's like or cult is short for a culture. So a cult, even if you like it or not, is some form of culture. The other thing is that culture is a living and breathing thing. So it adapts over time, and it's usually the result of things coming together, people coming together, a group of people together, and it often defines that group of people and is like a guideline of some sort for how those people are going to operate. So so that's sort of like how I would define the cultural part, and then I think gusto. It's going to be a lot of this episode is defining that part.
Well. So we can definitely dive into it because for us, gusto stands for something. So we'll kind of inform everybody kind of what that is. But just one quick sort of introduction to riff off a little bit of what you were saying. A lot of this comes from us trying to solve that problem that I think a lot of small business owners will have, where it comes to, how do I heard I need a mission. I hear I need a vision. I hear I need company values and all of that sort of stuff. And I've seen a lot of small businesses just waste time on that. Like they spend weeks in officer retreats and all this other stuff they make up to produce these things that nobody really cares about because they are just like a placard on the wall kind of thing, or a piece of paper that now we can say we have. But we wanted something that accomplished the spirit of what those things were supposed to do, right? Because really large organizations, they have to have that because you have to have some general over guidance when you've got 30,000 employees. How do you keep everybody organized? That's where those really come into play. Small businesses, not so much. We're a little more nimble. So we wanted something that was a little more impactful, I guess, is kind of how I'd phrase that. And that's where gusto came from. So I wanted to sort of introduce the story of kind of where it came up, and then, kind of go from there. Yeah. So with that, do you want to kind of take it over?
Yeah. So
on gusto,
and I'll just say that I've been there, right? Like, hey, let's get into a room and let's make a mission statement and a vision statement, and let's do these things. And it's a formula. It's formulaic. It's like you look at the ones from Procter and Gamble or GE in the 1990s, and then you're like, okay, let's make it look like ours, but make sure that we follow their rules. It has to be. It's like a haiku poem. It's like there's actually rules around it, and if you don't get this,
we have to say synergy at least 3 times.
Yes, exactly. And it is the most groupthink thing ever. It is just completely like, it's not cultural where the culture creates itself or it's a reality. It's usually hippo, like the highest paid person's opinion, the person who's the most dominant says it. People, there's a lot of back channeling. Like, I don't really like that one. Can we change this word here or there? And it's like, ultimately it's like an anti-leadership thing, or it just isn't really that great. And then when you try to permeate it through your company, it's like, you remember, that's our values. And then you're like, hey, let's recite that every single day. It's almost like they're trying to force people into a cult versus the culture happening naturally. So I agree with you. Yeah. Those things don't really happen naturally. And so that, I think we don't necessarily have a mission and vision statement that we recite all the time. We sort of know what our vision is. Maybe that's holding us back a little bit, but ultimately the idea here is that we're not tied to that. We're tied to more to the values, the core values that we have in place. And for us, and I'll just say this, for other companies I've been in, the way that it sticks, like figuring out a culture, is not to say like, what should our culture be? It's to take somebody who's exceptional in your company, and then try to figure out what makes them exceptional, why you like working with them, what makes them exemplary employee or team member, what they do, and then to try to figure out how do we get more people like that. And so that's an exercise that in a way led to Gusto. There's other things that led to it as well, but it's basically like take what you're doing and then just try to turn that into general rules for what makes you successful. And I could unpack that in a little bit, but I wanted to say sort of like that's generally the way that I found that it works. Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of happened naturally to us as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. So I can kind of introduce Gusto, what it is, and we can go through one at a time.
Yeah, let's do it.
Kind of do that. So Gusto stands for, as we're sort of alluding to, 5 certain things that we're looking for with our team members, with ourselves, just sort of how we exemplify working as a team. So GUSTO. So the G in Gusto stands for good enough to get going. The U stands for use the system to improve the system. The S stands for speed to result. The T is all about trust but verify, and the O is all about out with the trash. So let's cover those one at a time, and we'll start with that G of Gusto, which is good enough to get going. So kind of what's sort of your experience with that phrase and how you think about it?
Yeah, and so and I'll just say that like we'll unpack each one, and a lot of these things we were saying these before we even as we went along. So some of these things are sayings that we used every single day in our company, and it just became like the culture without officially becoming a part of the culture.
It was like these were little isms that the team used.
Yeah, exactly. So like good enough to get going, it basically means, I mean, you can see GETGG, and that is don't spin your wheels. Don't like just wait for something to be perfect. It's basically anti-perfectionism, anti-analysis paralysis, anti-procrastination. And it's saying that just get something that's good enough to get going. We'll fix it later. I think there's another phrase, make it better later.
Make it better later. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's like
because if it's broken, it's probably not good enough to get going, right?
Yep.
But that idea, exactly, if good enough to get going, we'll come back and make it better later, is to get people moving and focused on action, which I think you will notice most of this Gusto is really built around, is this whole concept of action and getting people to take more of it. And to your point, it's letting people get out of their own heads and say, okay, did we get the minimal viable result that this thing was supposed to get or that we think it's going to get? And if we're there, awesome, get it out into the market, because they're the only ones that can tell, right? Even if that's like a team member, like, oh, is it good enough for a report for another team member that needs to do this thing? Okay, well, it probably is. I don't know. Get it to them. If you think it's going to accomplish the result that it needs to accomplish, you're kind of done. You got to get it to the other person now who's going to interact with that so they can give you feedback. And that was the whole point of good enough to get going, is get it out into the public, because at a certain point, especially when you're working on marketing copy or funnels or things like that, you can get in paralysis analysis and talk about stuff forever. There's always another idea. There's always another thing you can do. And if it never gets to the public, there's no point to it and you're burning time. Yeah. So that was kind of the reasoning behind that.
Yeah. And when somebody doesn't do this, they bring the team down. They're just not fun to work with, in my opinion. So what I mean by that is like you assign something to somebody, or somebody takes something on, like, hey, I'm going to do that. I want to create a newsletter. I want to create this thing that we haven't done before. And then 3 weeks later, you check in with them and say, where is this thing? And they go, oh, I haven't done it yet. I was waiting. I wanted this to be good. I haven't had time to write it yet. I'm not a good writer. I don't like to do these things. And then it's like, okay, but you said you were going to do it. I don't care if it's perfect. I'm still going to probably edit 50% of the things anyway. We just need to get something done. And then they get it to you and it's terrible. It's not good at all. Or not. Yeah. Let's just say terrible. I don't care. And you're like, how did you spend so much time on this thing? Well, I was looking at the angles. I was thinking about this stuff. And I was like, then I was doing some research on newsletters and I was like, this is not what I asked you to do. I didn't ask for perfection. I asked for just good enough so that I can do something, because we are a team. Basically, you're saying, I want to be the hero that delivers this thing, but you taking on all that stuff, which nobody really asked of you, is resulting in the hero mentality, which means that you're the first one in, but you're the first one to die, generally speaking. Like you're trying to put it all on your shoulders, and the result isn't very good. If you just use teamwork and you got something going, you pass the ball over to me, you could put it into my skills. We can find the person who's good at writing. We can find these things. And so that's generally the anti good enough to get going, is somebody who lets it sit on their desk, lets it sit on their plate, doesn't tell people, extends the working on date over and over again for when they're going to work on this thing, and nothing ends up happening. And in our company, in any company, guess what? That usually makes the product worse, and that usually brings down morale. So you don't want to work with people who are afraid to put something out there that's good enough to get going. Now, fortunately, this is a teachable one where you can actually just tell people with expectation and management as to like whether or not you want that or not, right? You can just reinforce it. Hey, you check in with them on a weekly call, on a status call, and you say, hey, this isn't there. Let's talk about it. This is all that I really need. And they're like, oh, I thought you wanted this. And I was like, okay, I'm glad we talked about this thing. Now can you get this through to the finish line? Good enough to get going. That's all that I'm asking for. Generally speaking, you will get it. And then if you consistently don't get that, then you have to question whether or not that person is ever going to get it. Not on one project, but over time.
Yep. Yeah, I think the other aspect of that I've seen very positively used with that is where the team is working on a project and they're helping each other move it along because somebody's talking about something and they kind of go like, we kind of making it better later without actually getting good enough to get going first. And they can kind of move those projects along. So it works out really well. How about use the system to improve the system? So how do you think about that one? That's the U in Gusto. So if G is all about good enough to get going, the U is all about use the system to improve the system.
Yeah, this is one that I had to learn the most in our merger. Frankly, it's because I always looked at systems as a rigid thing. Like, hey, this is the system. This is the project management system. This is the Gantt chart. This is the deadline. I have no flexibility in this thing. And it's like, hey, somebody's better than me at systems because I'm not really a systems guy. Just assuming that somebody else would have the responsibility to make this thing happen versus me. And it feels, part of it means that if you have a system that's rigid and it's not open to feedback and it can't be improved, then you feel like you're helpless. You're trapped as an employee or a team member because you have no say in it. And it's sort of like this little prison. And I would bring this up to you all the time. I was like, hey, Mercer, I'm not able to do this in the system. You're like, well, why don't you fix it? Use a system to improve the system. You kept on saying that to me. And I was like, what do you mean? You're the systems guy. How am I supposed to do that? I'm not a system. Like, that's your role. And you go, well, no, everybody's responsible for the system. Culturally, we all need to make this thing better because how am I supposed to know what your frustrations are if you don't tell me, if we don't get that in place? Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, it means that you have an open, you're open to feedback. And then you have some really good sound bites on this. So I'd rather have you say some of your sound bites on it because I learned them all from you. But ultimately, it means that the system is open to feedback and that it can be improved and that this is not the final version ever. It's always 90% of the way there.
Yeah. I don't know about the sound bites, but I can tell you, from my perspective on the use the system to improve the system, it's about getting people to get out of the hypothetical. Mm-hmm. So they'll think like, oh, we can kind of do this, or maybe we can 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 do this. And I'm like, use it, find out, take action. Like and it does relate to that good enough to get going. Like these things overlap just in different ways. But there's a lot of times they're like, oh, should we change the system to do this? Or should we change, especially when you're operating with systems, should we change it to do this? Or should we make it to do this? Or should we make it to do that? It's like, I don't know, use it and find out. That is how you build systems, is by taking action, looking at what happened and going, oh, okay, that was the system I just used. Is that a good one? If so, repeat that process. If not, update that process. Like just give it feedback. And keeps it pretty easy there. So that's kind of what I've got for use the system.
I like that one. It's like be receptive to feedback. So just to put it as a practical example, somebody who's using the system to improve the system means that they don't think the system's always that way. They'll actually question whether we need it or not. Like, hey, do we need this anymore? Are we even using this? Is this helpful? Can we make this better? Can we make it, can we improve upon what's happening here? And making sure that when you're using something that you're not just following it blindly, you're thinking about, hey, this is actually something that can be improved.
How do we do it better? Right. It's exactly right. Having that constant improvement mindset is super important.
Yeah.
And again, getting people to use the system as opposed to, well, I'm just not sure how to do it. So I'm just not going to move on doing anything, or I'm going to think about 18 different things. And everybody gets caught up in that. But that's just where you go to like, okay, this is what's nice about Gusto is you can look at that, be like, okay, where am I not necessarily using the system to improve the system?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And for us, anybody who's frustrating for us in the company, it's because they're not using the system or they're not open to feedback. And so that's a pretty big, like if you can't adjust to that, and it takes a while, it takes maybe 3 to 6 months when you're in our company to do that. If you can't adjust to it, it's going to be really challenging to fit into our company. And anybody who just couldn't hang and couldn't handle it, it's because they just never adjusted to the system.
Yep.
The next one is speed to result. So I know this one was I wouldn't call it controversial, but this one had a lot of back and forth. It was probably the one that we had to really really refine it a lot. We had multiple different versions of this. We weren't even sure if we wanted speed in there. We talked about speed to revenue, I think, speed to income. Like we tried to make it a monetary goal. And then we had to repeal that because actually speed everywhere makes sense, but it's not just speed for speed purpose. It's not just like getting the Ferrari out of the garage, going as fast as you can and getting a ticket 6 minutes later. It's basically saying, how fast can we get to that result we're looking for? Yep. So any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's one of the simplest things, but one of the most powerful things. And I kind of like that in the world of Gusto, it revolves in the middle. Like, it's kind of right in the middle of that word or that phrase of that speed to result, because that's the whole point. Is if we're constantly asking ourselves, how do I do this a little bit faster? How can I get this result faster? You tend to find answers for that. But if you're asking yourself like, oh, well, how do I make this better? Then you're going to find answers for that. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an actual better result. It just means you're asking kind of the wrong direction. So it's like speed to result. Well, that also ties in with good enough to get going. It's helping to make sure that action is constantly sort of internally being driven so that it gets faster, faster, and faster. And that people are focused on that idea of speed. We don't need to come up with reasons why it's okay to delay a project. We need to come up with the reasons why it's okay to bring a project forward, if anything, right? Instead of pushing deadlines out, it's how can we bring the deadline in? And there's balance with this, right? Like this is something that everyone's sort of practicing. And, one person's definition of speed is different than maybe another's definition. Somebody thinks they can get it done in 2 days. Somebody else is going to be like, that's a 3-week thing. But that's where the conversations come up, right? So we can kind of find out where that is. But I think speed to result is one of my favorite ones out of all of these, because I think it's just for me, it's just one of those core things. Like, let's try to just get as fast as possible the minimal result that we can, good enough to get going, right? As we use the system to improve the system as we're going. So all of these things connect, but for me, they rotate around a lot.
Yeah,
for that
and to me,
on speed.
Speed to result was a pretty big missing link for us. Mm-hmm. When we first got started. It's the last one that we added to the culture. And it's and the reason why is because we were getting really good at using the system and we were improving the system. We'd spend all the time tweaking the system. And what happens is you have this perfect system with no revenue to support it and nothing getting out there. Or we were trying a lot of projects that were good enough to get going. And we did a bunch of like make it better later things, but nothing ever later never came. And so we add this thing in there for speed to result. Otherwise people could just keep on focusing on just activities versus results. And that was a big thing that we had some ups and downs with activities versus results. We were very activity focused for a while until we implemented this in place. The other thing that's really important about this, I would say, is that result is a part of our OPS system, the framework that we have at ProfitSchool. And almost everything we do is we start with the result and move forward. Our AI first business, you start with the result and go forward. Automation, start with the result and go forward. Even the measurement marketing framework at MeasureU has that. Everything is about results and then going forward. Ping pong prompting, which Mercer has coined that term using AI and has become this thing that everybody's like jumping to. Those are all things that you start with the result and move forward. So that's where we ended up on the word result, because that fits back into our framework. And so we can tie it. That's a bridge to things. Hey, results first. And then people start to think, oh yeah, we are trying to get results.
Yep, absolutely. So the T in Gusto is all about trust but verify. So let's talk about trust but verify. How do you see that?
Yeah, so trust but verify, it means that you need to trust it stands for TBV is what we say. And to me, that means that you let people do their work and you trust that other people are going to do what they said they're going to do, but you have to verify it in a minimum way to make sure that it meets your standards or meets the original result you're trying to achieve, or that it fits in with what's going on. And so it's basically like, hey, I trust that you did your role, but I'm going to be your human verifier. I'm going to be your backup to make sure that this thing doesn't go through. And so trust but verify is a layer of making sure that things happen. And it's our way of saying, hey, we got your back. We trust that you're going to do something, but we also need to make sure that you did it. And so we have multiple layers of TBV. We have TBVs for each role, and then the roles that are impacted by the role. So it's sort of like this matrix that you could go through as to who needs to review this thing in order to make sure that we're ready for production. So it's just a bunch of checks and balances.
Yeah, exactly. It's quality control. It's kind of what trust but verify was all about. And the idea is if you're working on something for a really long time, let's say it's, copy or something like that, you're going to see errors in that copy, but you're going to get blind to those errors because your brain will just fill in the blanks. You won't consciously see them a lot of times. And then all of a sudden you build out the page and somebody goes like, well, there's like, oh yeah, this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. And when they point them out, you're like, oh my God, how did I not see that? You did. You just saw it 47 times. And it's like banner blindness. You don't actually consciously are aware of it anymore. So you need that fresh pair of eyes. So trust but verify is all about, yeah, we know you did the job. We also know you did mistakes, and that's okay. That's why I'm here, I'm the safety net to come in to say like, okay, here's some things I saw that we can adjust. And the verifier, their job is not to go double check why it's right. Their job is to look for those errors that are obviously going to be there. They're going to be there. Everyone knows they're going to be there. The person doing the work knows they're going to be there. No one's surprised when somebody says, hey, this wasn't quite right, or this had some loose threads, because everyone's expecting it, because that's what the point of the safety net is to come in and say, oh, hey, we have this thing that's not quite aligned. Let's go back and quality control that a little bit. That's what it's there for. Now, if that person verifying can't find anything, awesome, even better, right? And that obviously happens as well. But the idea is that no one's trying to do the perfect work. Again, good enough to get going. The only reason they can get good enough to get going is because they know they may have missed something, because at this point it's good enough and maybe it could be better, but I'm not really sure. But you got to get it into public. Speed to results, right? So we're focusing on getting that done. And the whole idea is we're using the system to improve the system. And part of that system is trust but verify, having those quality controls in there. So I know that if I put something out there, you're going to catch it and be like, oh, hey, we can adjust this, and this. But you're not going to hold that against me and be like, cool, I should never have you do this again, because that's not the point. You knew there was going to be errors in there. I knew there was going to be errors in there. I know I can't see them. I know you will. And the two of us are now using the system to improve the system, speed to result, making a better, higher quality product, right? Getting that whole thing through. So that's kind of where trust but verify comes in for me.
Well, and the cool thing is that once somebody does their TBV step, the next thing is who's going to actually implement that? Who's going to make sure that the things they find that are wrong get fixed? And that's our final one, which is out with the trash. Now, that's the O in Gusto. I cheated a little bit. We usually say take out the trash, but I
like out with the trash.
Yeah, take out the trash. Out with the trash,
yes,
right? Because that gives us the O in Gusto. Otherwise, it'd be Gust, which isn't nearly as cool. We probably wouldn't do an episode about creating a culture of gust. But out with the trash is basically, if you see something, say something. If you notice that something's broken, don't wait for somebody else to fix it yourself. Yeah. Or make sure that you escalate it. Don't just be there. And this is, again, like every one of these things, if somebody isn't embodying that in our business, it brings the team down. It makes our culture worse. It makes us not as happy to work, not as much fun. So it's like, yeah, I noticed that. Like one of the worst things you can do is in our team is to say, yeah, I noticed that a few weeks ago, but I just didn't want to say anything. It's like, what are you talking about? Why didn't you say something? Like, are you just trying to be like, yeah, I was right? Like that doesn't work. That doesn't fit into our culture, because that's exactly not right. Collaborative. That's not being a good team member. And that's just not very, I just don't like it. It's just not how I want to operate. If I see something, I want to say something, and I want you to do the same thing, because that's how we're going to be better. And there's not like one garbage person in our company. Everybody does that. And again, this is one that I picked up from you, right? You told me that even when we were doing this podcast before we merged, you said, we call it take out the trash. I'm sure that we have an episode early in the podcast where you mentioned this thing. And obviously, as of here, it became part of the culture because it just makes sense. So how did that arrive? Is that something that you've always been saying? Did you have to tell it to somebody and then you're like, hey, that's a pretty good one, I'll say that to everybody?
Yeah, well, that kind of came out from the trying to solve for accountability. Again, that idea of self-responsibility and accountability, where it's like, like I always think about it when I'm walking out a hike or something like that, or walking around a lake or something. You see trash that somebody else left behind. Like if I see a candy bar wrapper, in my head I think, well, now that's my candy bar wrapper, because I didn't eat the candy and I didn't throw that thing there, but it's gross and shouldn't be there. And so let's just pick up this little piece of trash and make leave the space a little bit better, right? Like I noticed it. So yes, I could say to myself, well, I'm sure someone's going to pick that up, but it just happens. You just end up having more trash. And everybody thinks that's what's going to happen. And then the trash just keeps piling up. And I just, like I said, to your point, at a certain point, you're just like, it's just easier to be like, okay, that's just my trash now. I'm going to take, what would I do if I did that? If I accidentally dropped a candy bar wrapper, I would have picked it up. Right. Same thing when it comes into the world of business. Like you said, if there's a button click that's broken, that one of us comes up and says, oh, hey, you got to get this button. And somebody else says, oh yeah, I noticed that, but I didn't say anything. Like that's a perfect example of out with the trash, where it's like, why didn't that at that point you chose to let the button be broken because you noticed it and didn't do anything. That is now You absolutely have the responsibility at that point. And you chose, no, I think it's okay to keep it broken. But let's not mince words. That's what you chose. Out with the trash says that. That's what it is. And if it is something where you're like, this is wrong, but I don't know how to fix it, that's fine. Raise it up the ladder. Because what are we doing? We're using the system to improve the system, right? That's what the system calls for. It's like, hey, bring it up, bring it on an agenda call, on a meeting, on something. There's lots of different ways to do it. Assign a tray to somebody so they can get it done. Lots of ways to improve that. Without with the trash. But that's where that came from, was that idea of sort of self-responsibility. So I guess with, that as a final thought, if you want to kind of review, we can kind of review them all and wrap this one up as we get.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so my final thought is that this is like, from a culture perspective, when people do these things, and this would work for any company, but especially in our company, when they're doing these 5 things, they are an A+ player. They are exceptional, and you love working with them. And you're like, wow, they're such a good person to work with, and I really enjoy it, and it's fun. If somebody doesn't do one or many of these things, it adds to the frustration of working with them. And generally speaking, it's really a challenge. It's a grind to work with people who do not embody or practice these cultural values that we have in our company. And so, like, trying to get your company to do this thing and reinforcing it is really important, because the results are great. It's a pleasant time to go to work. It means that everybody's being exceptional, going above things. This is my definition of what an A player is. Like, a lot of times people talk about, hey, don't hire C players, don't hire B players, A players. It's like, ultimately, an A player does these 5 things in their role. And if they can consistently do that, they will be an A player. Now, and actually, if they maybe were a C player at another company, yet they do these things, it's probably because the company had different values and different culture. So I think that's really cool that we can do that. Yep. Now, it would be remiss to not mention about like how this fits into things like AI first culture and how we're doing things. And then I'll recap what these things are as well. But when you're like talking about AI first, the idea here is that you consult AI as the first person you talk to in order to get an opinion, or to strengthen your opinion, or to be more efficient with what you're doing. So if somebody gives you a task and says, hey, I need you to make a website for me, and you don't really, there's not a lot of input, right? If you normally would have to wait around, like, what do you want on this website? What should the design be? Whatever. Well, if you're going AI first and you're using Gusto, here's what you do. If you wanted something to be good enough to get going, you would consult AI and say, what goes into a website? What should be on a website homepage? What should be on these things? And it'll tell you a list, like, you need these things. So the good enough to get going is your list of assets. Then it would say, well, okay, now these elements in there, can you help me figure out what these elements would be, where they would fit, and what's there, right? Then you say, okay, cool. And then the next one, use the system to improve the system. You would have this template for a website that you're like, yeah, AI told me to do this thing. I'm not sure if it's great or not, but I'm going to use a system. So I'm going to actually ask AI any improvements you can make. Mercer does this all the time with ping pong prompting. Hey, tell me this output. What would you rate this on a 9 out of 10 of help me achieve this result? And then what ends up happening is that it's like you're a 6. And then you have AI refine it. Okay, how do we get to a 9? So then now you're at like a 9 out of 10 already for this project that was vaguely defined that you weren't sure what to do, because you had this co-pilot working with you and you're doing it in 10 minutes. Then speed to result. That's immediately there. You're actually not being paralyzed at all. You're okay. I know what the result is, that I want a homepage. I'm getting to that point, so I'm getting faster. So that's just implicit if you do the first 2. And AI really aids with that. Trust but verify. Okay, does this actually make sense? Maybe that's when you pull somebody in and say, hey, you told me to do this website. Can you review this thing and see if this is what you want? But you're not having to spend 3 weeks figuring out what something's on, trying to anticipate their needs, searching the internet or whatever. You did it in 15 minutes, and it's good enough to get going. It embodies a culture. And then finally, out with the trash, they're going to give you a bunch of feedback about what they didn't like, what they would change, and all that stuff. Now you're focusing on, okay, let's take out the trash on this thing. Let's get this thing going, making it better. So that would be a Gusto way of being AI first. Now you're getting an answer in an hour as opposed to 3 weeks. And chances are it's going to be just as bad as the thing that you took 3 weeks to do, but you're getting the answer faster. And that's just the whole point of everything, I think, in the modern business and the AI first business, is getting answers as fast as you can and being resourceful, not letting bottlenecks happen. It used to be that people could be your bottleneck. Now you don't need people to be your bottleneck, right? When you go forward to the Gusto and you go AI first, you have no excuse around bottlenecking. The only bottleneck is you not doing these things, not using the system, not doing good enough to get going, not looking for speed to result, not TBVing or pulling somebody into TBV, and not taking out the trash. So that's my thoughts on the culture. I love it, how it fits in really well with this idea of AI first. We think they go hand in hand. It takes a lot of the limitations that we had around humans, and it can remove those. It increases our speed to result, and it allows us to do things like define the result we're going after, be a lot more strategic, and go through everything we're looking at in our business. And so that's my final thoughts. I know, Mercer, you probably have some final thoughts too, but I think we're running out of time. So that wraps up this AI first conversation. Thank you for listening to the Profit School by MeasureU podcast. Share what you've learned and be sure to check us out at ProfitSchool.com and join that free community. The community's been bumping lately. We've been doing our AI first challenges. Everybody's jumping in, participating. So a lot of fun there in our community. Rate and review this episode on your favorite podcast platform, and we will see you in the next episode.